guys, tonight I'm working on the seat covers again, and I talked with Cecil a little bit last night on Mumble, and I really appreciate all the pointers, Cecil. There's been a couple other guys who've chimed in too, just about some technique and things like that. Been very, very helpful. One thing I did learn, if you're going to do this yourself, it sounds like the Rick Fix is watching, and there's one or two other guys, and I'm sorry, my mind's just not working real well, it's late, that are watching to see if this is something they can do. The one thing I have sort of figured out, the two little puckers that are on the seats, on the seat bottom, I'm going to tear those seams out. We're going to take those covers back off and we're going to redo them, because the rule is the piping should be the last thing that you sew in. So if your piping is on, you shouldn't be sewing back into that seam again. And what I did was I sewed the piping down the sides of it, and then I tried to sew a piece around the back, and when I did that I couldn't get that seam into the piping. Well, I think if I bust out that piping seam, sew across the back, and then put that piping back on, it'll all smooth out. I'm fairly certain. The other thing I've learned is, you know, I cut my old seats apart, for the old seat covers apart for a pattern, but it would have worked just as well to lay some paper across the actual seats and sort of use the old patterns as a guide, but then use the seat frames to really firm it up, and then, you know, add your 3/8 of an inch for the seam allowance, I think is the actual term. I was calling it something else, but it's the seam allowance. So add your 3/8 of an inch around the edge and you'll have it. So, and it doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but it needs to be pretty darn close. So anyway, what else did I learn? I just want to pass along some things. Oh, the foam, you know, cut the foam to the right size. Don't overcut it like I did. I do know some people put an edge around the foam, and that's fine. It's definitely not working for me doing that way. So when I take the seats bottoms apart, I'm going to cut the foam to the right size. The last thing is, and Cecil told me this one, I hog ringed that, I'm going to call it burlap stuff, to those seat frames, and I hog ringed it to the top, and those are translating through the vinyl. So Cecil said, instead of hog ringing them to the very top, hog ring them sort of underneath in the springs so that they can't make contact with the vinyl. He said, yeah, it might be fine now, but it'll wear through eventually. So that's kind of the takeaway from that. So Rick and anybody else who's wanting to pay attention here, that's one of the big lessons I've learned. That 2-inch foam, very comfortable. I sat down on it and it's like, wow, you know, I never sat on a Volkswagen seat that actually had padding. So anyway, I don't know how much of this I'm going to film. My wife's sort of upstairs watching TV tonight. I will show you the end product. The seat backs are probably not any more involved than the seat bottoms. The fact is they're just bigger, so you just have to watch that your vinyl's not stretching on you, you know, make some witness marks, things like that. So anyway, I'll show you things as I get them done, and if I can, I'll show you a little sewing too. I want to also take people through the machine and show you what the walking machine means versus a normal sewing machine. I don't have a normal sewing machine anymore, but you'll see it right away, okay? I'm using number 17 needles. You want to use sort of as big a needle as you can for work like this. You can see the numbers there. There's the 17, but then they also call them a 21, 25. So that's what you use, and you try and replace them, I guess, before every project. So I've replaced it just kind of halfway through this one just to be sure. But I wanted to show everybody the walking foot here and sort of what makes it different. So the outside has sort of two forks on it. So if I can hop around here, I know it's dark. And then the middle one here actually walks, and the needle goes through the center foot. So if I just sort of advance this, you can see that's the middle foot right there, and then the other feet walk, and they pull the fabric back and forth. And when you have big, thick, heavy fabric and you're hopping over the top of cording and stuff like that, that becomes very, very important. to have that, because it gives you the traction and it sort of smashes everything down and pulls it through, where a normal sewing machine foot just rides on top of what you have. It doesn't pull it through. So anyway, there's a little show on the machine there. There we go. There we go. I have to admit to you guys a couple things. I always, oh man, I had a bunch of pink come off the camera. That's unfortunate. Check that out. Yeah, I had to tape it onto the light last time we were together. I have to admit my mistakes. In the interest of full disclosure, I had the electric knife here and I was cussing it because you know, it's got two different blades, and I thought, you know, neither of them really worked very well. And I thought it was just a piece of junk Walmart knife, and you know, I popped out one blade and then popped in the other blade, and come to find out, you're really supposed to have both blades in at the same time for for this thing to work. I had one blade in, I thought, the other one, you know, it must have a meat cutting blade and a bread cutting blade or something. I figured they were just different. No, that's not the case. They're supposed to both go in at the same time. And as my wife said, if I would have just read the directions, everything would have been much better. And I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'm screwing it up now. So anyway, I'm going to put both of these blades in, then we're going to cut some foam, see if it works a little better. And by the way, thanks to Musty1 for the correction. I can't believe nobody else caught that. I just never had an electric knife in my hands before, so I didn't know the trick. So we'll come back and take a look at how good that works. That works a lot better. This little plate, this is where you release the seat, you know, you kind of fold the seat forward. This plate wasn't welded on from the factory flush with this back bar, and this seat was torn here. I looked at the other 3 seats I had, and all of them had this plate flush on this bar. So I'm going to cut it off, move it back, whatever, 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch to get it flush so that I don't tear my new seats. It's kind of strange. Usually VW stuff was very, very consistent from one thing to the next, but this plate was definitely out of kilter, so we're going to take care of that.